If you had told me years ago that my own parents would choose a party over my pain, I wouldn't have believed you. But life has a way of revealing truths you're not ready for. And mine came on the day I buried my baby boy. His name was Oliver. He was my first child. My miracle, after years of struggling, of tears behind closed doors, of quiet prayers in the middle of the night. When he came into my life, it felt like I could finally breathe. But that breath was stolen far too soon. Oliver passed away unexpectedly. I won't go into the painful details. They're etched into my heart forever. What I will say is that the world turned cold the moment I held him for the last time. My husband and I were shattered. But we leaned on each other, believing that our family, especially my parents, would be there to hold us up. The funeral was arranged. A small, simple service, because that's what we could manage in our grief. I called my parents. I expected tears, heartbreak, sorrow that matched mine. Instead, I got indifference. My mother's voice was flat. My father barely spoke. "We'll try," my mother said, as if attending their grandson's funeral was optional. I didn't understand. I couldn't. It wasn't until the day of the funeral that the truth hit me like a cruel joke. They didn't show up. No call, no message, nothing. I found out later, from a cousin's careless social media post, that they had chosen to go to my brother's pool party instead. My baby's funeral, and they were sipping cocktails by the pool. That was the day something inside me changed. The grief didn't just hollow me out. It lit a fire that told me I wouldn't let this betrayal slide. They would regret the choice they made. And this is the story of how I made sure they did. After the funeral, when the last guest had left, and the tiny white flowers on Oliver's grave swayed gently in the breeze, I sat in the empty house and stared at the walls. The silence was deafening. My husband sat beside me, his hand holding mine, but even his touch couldn't fill the void. I kept thinking, maybe they'll call. Maybe they'll realize what they've done. But the hours turned to days, and all I got was a text. One single, hollow text from my mother that read, "Hope you're doing okay. We didn't want to ruin the mood at Josh's party." I felt like I'd been punched. Ruin the mood? My baby had died, and they were worried about ruining a party? You see, my brother Josh was always the golden child, the one they doted on, defended, excused no matter what. I used to think it was just favoritism. But now? It felt like I didn't even belong in the family. Like my pain didn't matter because I wasn't him. And as I sat there, something hardened inside me. I realized I'd been chasing their approval all my life. Birthdays they forgot, achievements they downplayed, milestones they ignored. And now this. Now they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That night, as I lay awake, I made myself a promise. I won't let this be the end of the story. They chose him over me, over Oliver. But I'll make sure they never forget the choice they made. And that was the moment the plan began to form. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a heart that felt as if it had been shattered into pieces, too small to ever put back together. But beneath that heartbreak, something else had begun to grow. A quiet determination, a voice that kept whispering, "No more." I went through the motions of the day, answering sympathy messages, cleaning up the house after the funeral, holding my husband when he broke down. But in the back of my mind, I was piecing together a plan. You see, my parents had always relied on one thing, that I'd stay silent, that I'd accept my place in the background while Josh basked in their attention. But this time, they hadn't just hurt me, they had disrespected the memory of my child. And I couldn't let that go. So I started gathering every little thing they had tried to keep hidden. Financial secrets. The way they'd borrowed money from me over the years and never repaid it. The way they'd used my name to co-sign loans for Josh when he'd messed up his credit. The way they had promised to help with Oliver's medical bills and then disappeared when it mattered most. I didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. What I wanted was accountability. I wanted them to feel what I felt, abandoned, betrayed, invisible. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew it would mean cutting ties that, even after all this, still connected me to the hope of being loved by them. But I also knew that I couldn't keep letting them walk over me. Not anymore. So that night, while my husband slept fitfully beside me, I opened my laptop and started writing the letter that would change everything. I stared at the blank document on my laptop for what felt like hours. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling not from fear, but from the weight of everything I'd carried for so long. And then, I began to type. Every word in that letter came straight from the heart. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I wrote about Oliver, about how his short life had meant everything to me, about how I had dreamed they would be the kind, supportive grandparents I once imagined they could be. And then I wrote about the funeral. How, instead of standing by my side, they chose to sip cocktails by the pool and cheer on my brother as he splashed around with his friends. I described the loneliness, the silence, the empty seat I'd saved for them, foolishly hoping they'd show up at the last minute. I poured out every memory of the times I'd been overlooked, overshadowed, and discarded. From childhood birthday parties to my wedding day when they left early because Josh had something more important going on. But the letter wasn't just about pain. It was about the truth. About holding up a mirror so they could finally see the damage they'd caused. Not just now, but for decades. And at the end, I made my promise clear. You taught me what it feels like to be abandoned by the people who are supposed to love you most. I hope one day you remember that feeling, because I'm done chasing after people who treat me like an afterthought. When I finished, I didn't feel relief, not yet, but I felt stronger. I printed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and set it aside for the perfect moment. Because I wasn't going to just mail it. No, they were going to hear this truth face to face, at a time they'd least expect it. I didn't rush to deliver the letter. I waited. I wanted the timing to be right. Not out of spite, but because I knew that, for once, they would have to sit with the truth when it mattered most. And then, the opportunity came. A few weeks after the funeral, my parents hosted a lavish barbecue to celebrate Josh's latest promotion. The invitations went out like clockwork, glossy cards, handwritten notes, photos of Josh and his family smiling on the front, as if nothing had happened. As if Oliver's passing was just a forgotten detail in their perfect world. I received my invitation in the mail, and instead of tossing it aside, I decided this would be the day. I showed up, not because I wanted to be part of their celebration, but because I wanted them to look me in the eye as they read my words. I wore black, the color of mourning, in sharp contrast to the bright reds and blues of the party. People laughed and sipped drinks. My parents beamed with pride at Josh. And when I arrived, the mood shifted, just slightly. Just enough for people to notice the tension. I approached my parents quietly. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I simply handed them the envelope and said, I want you to read this. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. They exchanged glances, the kind that said she's being dramatic again. But they took it. I watched as they opened it, standing there in the middle of their perfect party, and began to read. The smiles faded. My mother's face turned pale. My father's jaw tightened. The guests kept chatting, oblivious. But at that moment, I knew the truth had hit them harder than any words I'd ever spoken aloud. And for the first time, I saw doubt in their eyes. Doubt that they could keep pretending everything was fine. As my parents stood frozen, clutching the letter, I watched the transformation happen in real time. My mother's hands trembled slightly. My father's usual confident stance slumped just a bit, like the weight of my words had knocked the wind out of him. They didn't know where to look. At me, at the paper, at each other. And then it happened. A guest, a family friend, noticed. Is everything okay? You both look like you've seen a ghost. More people began to glance our way. The laughter and music didn't stop, but beneath it, I could sense the shift. Whispers, curious eyes darting toward us. My mother, always so poised, tried to smile, tried to fold the letter and tuck it away like it was nothing, but I gently placed my hand on hers. Don't hide it. Not this time. You always hide things. Why don't you let people see who you really are? The tension cracked the air like a lightning bolt. The guests grew silent, one by one. Even Josh, who had been basking in attention, noticed the change. What's going on? He asked, approaching with that familiar mix of annoyance and entitlement. My father cleared his throat, struggling to find words. But how could he? How do you defend skipping your grandchild's funeral for a pool party, in front of the very people who'd praised you for being such a close-knit family? Someone asked softly. What's she talking about? And that was it. The perfect family image they'd so carefully maintained started to crumble. My parents looked around, realizing there was no easy way to explain this, no way to spin it. The truth was out, and the shame was theirs to carry. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The silence at that party was deafening. My parents, always so skilled at putting on a show, stood exposed. My mother clutched the letter to her chest, like it could somehow protect her from the stares, the judgment, the truth. My father opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. What could he say? The guests weren't fools. Whispers turned into questions. What letter? What does she mean? Funeral. Whose funeral? And then it was Josh who broke the tension. "What the hell is going on?" he snapped. His tone wasn't concerned for me. It was protective of their image. Typical, I could have stormed out right then. I could have left them to clean up their mess. But I didn't. I stayed. I met every single gaze with calm, steady eyes. I wanted them all to see that I wasn't the broken, invisible daughter my parents painted me to be. I was done hiding in the shadows of their lies. "They didn't come to Oliver's funeral," I said, my voice clear, steady. "They were here that day, at one of these parties, laughing, drinking, celebrating, while I buried my child." The weight of those words settled over the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at my parents with disappointment. Others looked at me with something that felt like respect. My mother tried to speak, some excuse, some justification, but I raised my hand gently to stop her. "No more lies, Mom. Let them see you for who you are." That day, the party didn't end with cheers and toasts. It ended in awkward goodbyes, quiet exits, and lingering stares at my parents. Stares filled with the kind of judgment they'd always tried to avoid. And as for me, for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The day after the party, I expected the silence. I expected my phone to be quiet, my inbox empty. What I didn't expect was how quickly the truth would ripple through the community. By that evening, messages began to trickle in. Not from my parents, of course. No, they were too busy licking their wounds, trying to figure out how to salvage their image. But friends of the family, neighbors, old acquaintances, they reached out. Some sent quiet words of support. Others simply said they were sorry they hadn't known. "I can't believe they did that to you," one message read. "You deserved better." Oliver deserved better. And as painful as it was to relive that loss, to hear my baby's name spoken with such regret, it also felt like a balm. People finally saw. They saw the truth I'd been carrying alone for so long. Meanwhile, my parents were in damage control mode. I heard through the grapevine that they tried to spin the story, that they hadn't realized the timing, that no one told them, that it was all some tragic miscommunication. But no one was buying it. The people who'd been at the party couldn't unsee what they saw. They couldn't unhear my words. And slowly, I began to notice the cracks in my parents' perfect social armor. Invitations dried up. Their phone didn't ring as often. The admiration they'd always counted on, it faded, replaced by quiet disapproval. And I stood taller, stronger. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the daughter they could dismiss, the grieving mother they could ignore. In a way, I realized they'd done me a favor. By showing the world who they truly were, they freed me to be who I truly was. I knew it was only a matter of time before my parents tried to regain control. And sure enough, it came a few days later, a knock at my door. I opened it to find them standing there, looking worn in a way I'd never seen before. The confident, polished parents I grew up with had been replaced by people who looked small. My mother spoke first, her voice trembling between anger and desperation. "How could you humiliate us like that, in front of everyone?" I took a deep breath. "How could you abandon me like that, when I needed you the most?" For a moment, no one spoke. My father's eyes darted away, as if the floorboards held the answers he couldn't find. My mother, always the master manipulator, tried again. "We were grieving too. You don't know what it's like." "No," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "You don't get to rewrite the story. You didn't show up. Not for me. Not for Oliver. And now you're not here because you're sorry. You're here because your masks fell off, and the world saw what I've always seen." The truth hung heavy in the air. For once, they had no response. No excuse polished enough. No lie smooth enough to cover what they'd done. I'm done, Mom. Dad, I don't owe you anything anymore. I'm moving on. I hope someday you'll look in the mirror and regret what you did. But that's no longer my burden to carry. I closed the door gently. No slamming, no shouting. Just finality. And as I stood there, the weight I'd carried for so long seemed to lift. They had lost me that day. But more than that, they had lost themselves. After that final confrontation, something in me shifted. For years, I'd carried this desperate hope that my parents would change, that they'd see me, that they'd love me the way I needed. But in that moment, as I closed the door, I finally understood. I didn't need their validation to heal. I channeled my energy into creating something beautiful, something that would honor Oliver's memory. I started a small charity in his name, an organization that supports grieving mothers who feel forgotten, just as I once did. It wasn't grand or flashy. It didn't make headlines. But it made a difference. And for the first time in so long, I felt like I was making a difference too. Every donation, every letter of thanks I received, every tear I shared with another mother, it helped mend a piece of my broken heart. As for my parents, we drifted further apart, naturally. The invitations stopped coming from their end as well. Occasionally, I'd hear about them through mutual acquaintances. I heard how their social circle had shrunk, how their reputation had dimmed. And while part of me thought they deserved it, a deeper part of me simply felt peace. I had let go of the bitterness. I didn't need revenge. The truth had spoken for itself. Looking back now, I see that moment, when they chose a pool party over my child's funeral, as a turning point. Not the end of my story, but the beginning of one where I stood tall, on my own, with my baby's memory as my guide. To anyone out there who's felt invisible, unloved, discarded, I see you, I was you, and I promise you are stronger than you think.